So this week's Parsha is Parashat Bo. Starts right at the beginning of Exodus chapter 10. Hold on, let me drop that in the chat in case you need the text. It includes the final three horrible plagues, including, of course, the final plague of the death of the firstborn sons of Egypt. A few interesting notes. So there's a comment about the Israelites asking their Egyptian neighbors for valuables. The English word in the translations I have seen says borrow, although the Hebrew word comes from the root to ask. So I guess there's not necessarily inherently in the Hebrew the same connotation of like this will be returned that there is in the English borrow, but it still seems a little odd to me that, you know, it says God disposed the Egyptians favorably to them. So there is sort of a suggestion that this was given out freely. There's also a midrash that during the plague of darkness, it wasn't a physical darkness, it was like a blindness for the Egyptians, and the Israelites could still see. So that made it possible for the Israelites to just go and plunder Egypt, basically.
Why do you
What?
think the translation? Why do you think the translation chooses borrow? Mine does also.
I don't know, maybe to soften the implications of what's happening. Let's
Right,
see if
translation.
the what? In the
It's not
translation.
not the job of a translation to soften the.
Well, I mean, we've discussed this before. Every translation is a interpretation. There's no perfect way to do it. Hold on, let me find it in the Hebrew and see if like Rashi, like what it says about the Old French or something. This is too far. This is the plague of death.
I mean, I know you bring to a translation part of yourself. I understand that, but if it says give, there's no reason to put the word translate in unless there's something. I'm sorry, it's a small point. You can keep.
It says
going.
ask.
Okay.
Sha'al. What is that? This is not the usual darkness it was felt. Yeah, so that's part of what so there's a few details in there that lend itself to the midrash that the Israelites plundered. Which, I mean, I don't have a problem with that either. Like, they were they're entitled to reparations. Like, even if they did use the darkness to their advantage, it just went and took. I think that's fair.
Right.
But
they worked hard for it.
Yeah, but so that's a question, a machloket perhaps about how we understand the text. And then let's see. So then the another interesting little tidbit here is the question again in the language. Oh, Juliet's here. The night of the final plague, it said, you know, after Pharaoh's son dies, it says while it was still like that very night, so it implying while it was still dark out, Pharaoh summons Aaron and Moses to say, go. A few lines down, like 2 verses later, it says that very day, the Lord led the Israelites out of Egypt. So again, there's this question of, you know, night and day. How do we understand when they left? Now you could just say like the Peshat is like a day is a 24-hour period, even the parts that happen after dark, right? So like that very day could still be at midnight or whatever. Um, but there's a midrash, and this I mentioned this a little bit last week, that Aviva Zornberg latches onto this in a way that I just find like gripping. That there's a midrash that the Israelites, Pharaoh says to go at night, but they leave the next morning. So she says uh, it was like a test of their freedom to disobey Pharaoh and test out their allegiance to their new master, God, and wait for God to lead them out by day. And that the way she describes that night of waiting, like she points out too in that chapter, in her chapter on this parsha, how we think of matzah as, in some parts of Exodus it says this, that they did not have time for the dough to rise, but God tells them specifically to make matzah. They are prepared to leave. They have the matzah, they have the roasted lamb, they have a whole, like, they have time to make bread if they wanted to. This is intentional. And so she said there's like this like she calls it a tableau in several places. She uses different adjectives, a tableau of leaving, a tableau of release, a tableau of the Exodus, that like there's this like implied motion or like this poised readiness to make haste, but it's frozen. They're waiting for the moment. And I just think that that's so, I don't know, it just resonates with me very deeply. Um, and especially this week, to be honest, I felt that way a bit. This week happened to be my turn to write the Devar Torah for my school listserv that it sends out to all the alumni and students and everything. So I had to write it by Monday. This is a hard week to write for Shabbat on Monday. And so, but thankfully the Torah portion and Zornberg really came in clutch, because that's how I felt. I felt this like tableau of like, what's gonna happen? Gotta be ready for anything. Um, kind of like frozenness. Yeah, so that anticipation she did how this night must have felt, she really gives voice to, I think, so masterfully. And it's something I don't know that we think about all that often. Like, you think about the fear of knowing the angel of death is out there, the protection of the blood on the lintel. Is this gonna work? Did I do it right? What if my child runs out the front door? Because sometimes kids do that. Um, like these things, but I guess, I don't know that we think about also then that the fear of leaving, or the anxiety about being ready to go as well. And I'm someone, I get super anxious before I travel. Like, I'm not afraid of flying. I don't mind long car rides, especially if I'm driving. If I'm not driving, sometimes I get car sick. But but like that moment before I leave, or like those first few miles when it like I could still go back, and I like go through my checklist so many times, make sure I have everything. And then once I'm past a certain distance, I'm like, well, if I forgot something, like I'll buy a new toothbrush there or whatever. But like, I don't know. So that feeling of how the Israelites must have left on you know, this really significant journey, and they didn't have much to pack up, but they took their spoils from Egypt. They had their matzah, they had whatever it was, they had to make sure they were ready to go. 1236, Joel gave us the citation, so we can look at what Rashi says about borrowing. No, that's still not the borrow. line.
It's okay.
Okay.
But that feeling that you're describing,
Which verse number for borrowing?
Yeah,
That'd be 35.
35.
What, 1035?
1235.
All right. So,
Oh yeah, there we go. Borrowed. Okay.
okay. Well, they just say ask.
Yeah, Rashi says ask there too.
But it also has the implication of demanding. It's not just to ask, according to Strong, it's to inquire and by implication to request and by extension to demand. So a little bit stronger than saying, "You want to give me your jewels?" It's more along the lines of, if you give me your jewels, maybe this will be the end of things. You know?
Oh, or
A
Chaim.
little implied threat. It was the way I read it.
Here, or Chaim says, the stress of the implication, which must be somehow implied in the conjugation of ask there, that, I see the root, but Yish Alu, they asked, it looks like to me. But Or Chaim, which is a Hasidic text, says the Torah stresses that the reason we use borrowed is to teach that the Israelites were not greedy for material goods, but they were doing this because Moses had instructed them to.
I
So
saw I saw an interpretation here that, borrow means also ask or demand, and it means the return of items was hardly intended. And he's comparing it to the English expression borrow a match, which would be impossible to return.
Right. Yeah.
My version refers me back to Exodus 3, verse 22, where it says, 21 and 22, I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall come to pass that when you go, you shall not go empty, but every woman shall ask of her neighbor and of her that sojourneth in her house jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the note says, for the mere asking, they will be given in gladness and friendliness, precious and valuable gifts. But the Hebrew sha'al or sha'al means to ask as a gift with no idea of giving back the object thus received. So I would go along with what David said, borrow a match. I'm not going to give you the match back, or replace it with a good match.
Right. Yeah. So there we go. And then they end up melting those jewels down, for some of them, for the golden calf later. So we know what becomes of these spoils. Some go into the Mishkan. But sorry, Debbie, you were going to say something else about that anticipation as well.
when I read it, you're right. I mean, when we go on a trip, you start one, did I take care of everything that needed taken care of? But also this was like, and I know that there was a lot of journeying back and forth in earlier chapters in Genesis and earlier chapters, but still, this is like the first description of an immigration, of an emigration or an immigration. And every time somebody in this world of ours has to travel from their country to a new place, it must be this kind of thing. So,
Right. Yeah. And right. And like, there's so much, that's such a powerful comparison too, Debbie, because they think about like how it must feel for someone as a refugee today, and like knowing that they have to go. The situation they're in is untenable. Wherever they go next will be inarguably better, but the journey will be hard. Getting there will still be hard. Like establishing your new life will be hard. Like every step of it will still be in some ways more difficult than staying, right? Like at least when if staying, you'll there's some comfort in knowing how horrible it's going to be. Leaving, there's so much fear and possibility, but there's also the promise of living.
So I don't think anybody ever makes that journey lightly, despite what politics sometimes says. And to put
Right.
yourself through this, things had to have been pretty nasty.
Yeah. Joel, go ahead.
I just want to throw this out. The word sha'el, it's easy to remember because at the Seder we have arba'a sha'ela, meaning the 4 questions. And the question meaning the 4 inquiries. Okay?
Yeah.
In Yiddish, we say the 4 Fragies. A little bit different.
Oh. I've never heard them in Yiddish. So let's see. What else happens in this parsha? That's pretty much we don't get to we don't get quite to the sea yet. That's next week. But we managed to at least we're free. That's where this parsha ends. And there's lots of references to Passover, which is cool. Like we have some of our holidays, most of our holidays are biblically rooted in some way. But Passover is the only one that's really is honored for the most part. I mean, the Seder as we know it is a later invention, but it is so based on exactly what is said in this parsha, in a way that most of our other holidays don't really have that. Like, we Sukkot, the Torah tells us to live in huts, but it doesn't say much else. And they all have, of course, sacrifices associated with them. In the Torah description of Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot, the 3 pilgrimages, and we don't make pilgrimage anymore. We don't make sacrifices. So a lot of the things that are in the described in the Torah, same thing with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they have pilgrimage and sacrifice rituals associated with them in their Torah description that we don't have anymore. So the whole you will tell this story, you will eat matzah, you will the firstborn will fast, and you redeem your firstborn, like all of that is so direct, which is kind of I think that's neat. Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
Yes, one phrase that I saw more than once, I wasn't sure why, but like 10:20, after the locusts are dissipated, it says, but the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart and he would not let the Israelites go. I didn't understand the Lord stiffening his heart. That seemed contrary. It's like he's not theoretically under the direction of the Lord. He did this in spite of what the Lord caused to happen.
Did this. I mean, as we discussed last week, I think the whole thing with the Lord stiffening Pharaoh's heart has to do with like the Lord has a plan
Uh,
for the whole political theater of it all. And if it doesn't go as planned, then like it might not have the same effect on
okay.
all of Egypt and all of the Israelites. Although I'll tell you, like, as an activist, when we have a plan for an action to like call out an institution, we also always have a backup plan for like what happens if the congressman actually comes out and talks to us and like has a pleasant conversation. We don't just like turn our back on him and continue to say he's not listening. But you know, maybe we learned this from from God here. Uh, um,
I was,
yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking about that a lot too, because last week and this week, it's not our modern idea of fairness. But then after I read this portion, I thought this is one of the few places in the Torah where the Israelites do what God asks them to do willingly without any argument. I mean, back at the beginning, when Moses first came and asked Pharaoh to let my people go, and Pharaoh put the extra tasks on, everybody was mad at Moses.
Right.
And throughout the walk to the promised land, over and over and over again, they argue with God and what he does and why he does it, and it's not happening. But this time they you know, all that anticipation that you talked about before. And maybe that's because of God making sure that this process was long and drawn out and gave them time to think about it. And so maybe that's, maybe justifies it. I still feel sorry for all the poor innocent, you know, housemaids and all, but still, maybe that justifies it.
But I think like that's part of it too, is that I mean, sure, there were probably poor Egyptians that were already like in favor of freedom and a different society from step one, but there were probably the vast majority of Egyptians, and we know this from modern society, that there was Pharaoh and the people creating the unfairness, and there's people bearing the brunt of the unfairness, and then there's people in between that are like not doing anything bad, but also like fine with it because they're comfortable. And so the plagues are, you know, part of the political theater of it all also is not just to impress the Israelites and cause undue damage on Pharaoh, but to make sure it trickles down to all those people in between, that like they have to feel impacted. And this, you know, we struggle with that word of sha'al, borrowing, demanding, stealing, whatever, but there's also, you know, as David pointed out in the beginning of Exodus, that the Egyptians will give freely. So like maybe they're at a point now where they've been made to feel that discomfort, and they understand now why they should give reparations, you know. So there's all that. There's also, I'm looking on Safaria, Rabbeinu Bachya, which I have to say, I'm not entirely sure who that is. We can look that up as well. 12th century Spain, okay, or 13th century Spain, sorry, 1200s. He says that that God reinforced Pharaoh's resolution, that, and as I said last week too, like Pharaoh's a terrible person. Like I don't think Pharaoh needed a lot of help being convinced to maintain his slave-based economy. But so Rabbeinu Bachya here is saying, like, after all of these horrible plagues, like what a rational mentally healthy person would do now is have a complete mental breakdown and have PTSD and not be able to make any decision one way or another. But God, like, what was the verb I just used? Reinforced Pharaoh's resolution to like maintain what was already like Pharaoh's natural disposition. So I like that explanation. I've not seen that one before. But that works for me.
He wasn't exactly a good guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much the, I don't know, the standard of evil. I feel like, I mean, we have others, Haman, Amalek, whatever, but Pharaoh's Pharaoh's the first and the most human, I think. Like Amalek is very ill-defined, and Haman is, I mean, the Book of Esther is a farce. Like it's meant to be kind of silly, like exaggerated. But there's so much about Pharaoh that feels very real to me. In the way that very real people can be evil. Um, I'm sure Hannah Arendt had something interesting to say about him at some point. I haven't read it, but yeah, Dave, go ahead.
I have a question a little earlier. This will be chapter 10, right before God tells Moses to stretch your hand over the land of Egypt for the locust. It seems like Pharaoh, maybe I misread this, starting in verse 7, when Pharaoh's servants say to him, how long will this one be a stumbling block to us? Let the people go. They'll worship their God. Don't you know yet that Egypt is lost? I was kind of surprised to hear that. But then it sounded like Pharaoh was saying, go worship the Lord your God. Who are you going with? And he's answered, Moses said, our youth, our elders, our sons, our daughters, our flocks and our cattle, we will go, for it is festival of the Lord to us. Was that just to pray, or was that to go out of Egypt? Because it sounds like Pharaoh says, so may the Lord be with you, just as I will let you and your young children out. Though he doesn't say he's going to let the flocks and cattle go.
Right. He, I think there's like a negotiation sort of happening here where Moses says, we need to go worship God and do this festival stuff. And Pharaoh thinks that perhaps by letting them go to worship, because as his courtiers say, like they need, like, God is God. We're lost. We've lost this divine war that's happening. But there's an implied like you go up to, out to the wilderness and do your festival, but then come back. You still have to work for me. And so then when he realizes that's like not what Moses intends to do, he's like, no, never mind.
Okay. Because for a moment it looked to me like he was capitulating, and I'm saying to myself, so why the locust? He's already given in.
Yeah, in verse 10, it says, I mean to let your children go. But then he says, no, clearly you're bent on mischief. In verse 11, he says, no, you menfolk go and worship the Lord. So it's like he was thinking about it, but then he changed his mind.
Right. Because that clearly you are bent on mischief is that key, that like you can go worship God, you cannot go free. But then there's like, well, if I let you leave it all, how do I know you'll come back? Kind of thing happening.
Thank you, Debbie.
Joel points out the important verse 12:2, that this shall be a new year. So there are 4 New Years. Is New Year's. In Judaism, are the commentaries going to tell me all right here what they are? No, I might have to look it up. So I'm obviously Rosh Hashanah is the new year for years. Passover, or the 14th of Nisan, is the first year of months of tithes. Tu B'Shvat is the first year of trees. I can't remember offhand. Oh, Elul, for the first of Elul is the new year for animals. For reasons. So we get lots of New Year's. And I like that. Passover and Rosh Hashanah, at least, both make a lot more sense to me as New Year's times than January 1st. You know, the beginning of fall, the beginning of springs, seasons change, and dramatically too, like depending on where you live, I guess, the segue from spring to summer or fall to winter can be slower, but that first warm day in the spring when things start sprouting, that's a new year. That first beautiful fall day when the temperature drops and you notice how orange the trees are, that's a new year. Yeah, Joel, go ahead.
So the question that I've been mulling over, I'd like to ask people here, when you measure time, do you measure it by the year? Do you measure it by the month, maybe by the decade? How do you measure time? And why does that work for you? Here's why I ask. According to Chabad, they say that Exodus 12:2 is the first commandment in Torah. Now, I'm still wrestling with that a little bit. I want to see how they come up with that, because to me, well, whatever. But this is so important because, first of all, it looks like it has absolutely nothing to do with the plagues and leaving Mitzrayim. So, like, how would you measure time? And like, why did they stick that in there, like in the middle of everything? Here's what we say, mitten drinnen in the midst of everything. It's just stuck in there. Must be there for a reason. And it has to do with how we measure time. So that's what I'm asking. Like, do you say, oh, it's been a good year, it's been a good month, or it's been 6 months since I've seen my grandchildren, or like, how are you influenced by time? And it has to do with 12:2.
I think it depends on what I'm measuring for. Like you said, sometimes month to month, because that's what's on my calendar and I note what I have to do for the month of February. But sometimes it's for other things. And I thought they stuck this in mittendrin because to show how important it was. But again, my time measurement, if I know I have theater tickets or I know I have a vacation planned in April, so that's a chunk of time for me. But I know I have a doctor's appointment next week, so that's another chunk of time. It really depends.
Which method is most accurate? Our solar calendar year or our monthly calendar?
Well,
which is more reliable?
That's not they measure different, according to different things. So like time is not a fixed entity. It's very relative and very sociological. So there's no such thing as like more reliable, but objectively.
Give you an example. The year is 1752, a little bit before the American Revolution. And all the people on September 2nd of that year went to sleep. And they all slept for 11 days. When they woke up the next morning, it was September 14th. Anyone hear that before?
So
Okay.
change in calendar,
What?
is that the change in calendar?
Well, what happened?
From-
Why did all of a sudden something did happen? And it's right. It's in the history books. And what happened was they started to notice that time was slipping back into the past, not into the future, into the past. How did they notice it? Because they start to notice that the seasons are getting out of whack. And someone, sure enough, he took out his equipment and he looked up and he could see that they were waiting for the autumnal equinox and the vernal equinox. And they noticed that their count was way off. So they all said, by the way, this is all around the world. It was in the United Kingdom, it was in the United States, Australia. They said, we're going to eliminate 11 days out of our calendar. Sure enough, you look up any details, find out how many people died on September 9th, 10th, 11th, it's 0 because those days do not exist. Okay. So I was
Wait, but
thinking,
you, hold on, I have a question, because you said it was all around the world, and then you named 3 countries that at the time were all still a part of the same country. So were non-United Kingdom, like non-colonized places also in on this?
well, I'm not sure that they were all using the Gregorian calendar.
Okay,
I'm sure Europe did the same. I'm pretty sure.
okay,
Place like Papua New Guinea, I'm sure they didn't even know what we're talking about.
okay.
It is. Next, I started to think, let's see, Shabbat is coming up on the 23rd. So if I say to myself, what do I have on my schedule for 343 days from Shabbat? What's on my schedule? I already know perfectly well that's also Shabbat. How do I know that that's the number 7 cubed? Or the number 749 times 7? I know that because it's a prime factor of that number, 343. So in other words, what's happening right here is we're being told you need to start reckoning time for yourself. Okay, back in the days of Noah, I didn't hear anything like that. Okay, and
Right.
they're saying you have to set this as being the first of the months. Okay, and it's very simple Hebrew. And it said you have to take this upon yourself. And now Rashi had interesting comments about this. And Rashi said, well, this goes back to Genesis because first God created or is light, but that's not light like from the sun.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know that? Because it doesn't occur to Genesis 1:4 when it says, and God created the 2 luminaries, meaning the sun and the moon. Okay, and now there's a lot of beautiful midrash about the sun and moon. They're having arguments, and the moon doesn't want to just rule over the sun. So they said, well, you can come in the daytime too. And then the moon says, well, no good, because that would be like bringing a candle into the daylight, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, this is a very big thing in Judaism. And I know our calendar, I've studied this a lot from when I was in the Boy Scouts back in the day, a lot of years ago. And our calendar is accurate up to, in a 20,000 year period, it might lose an hour. It's like it's so accurate. And that really helps us keep all of the Chagim, all the holidays in their own seasons, which is so important. Now, conversely, the Islam, they're like all over the place with Ramadan. Sometime it's summer, sometime it's winter. I can't keep track.
Right, they don't have a leap year to reset.
Even something like Easter. Back in the day, the Catholic Church used to have to come to the Yehudim, to the Jews, and ask them, when should we celebrate Easter? And you know, the Jewish guys said, just get out of here. We don't want to be bothered with you. So can't you figure it out yourself? And those guys said, no. We know that you know when Pesach is going to be. And just between us, it's very simple. You have to, first you have to wait for the vernal equinox. That occurs first. Next, you have to wait for the full moon. Okay? There begins Pesach. Okay? Now, for Easter, you wait till the first Sunday after the vernal equinox, and you wait for the full moon. Boom. The next Sunday is going to be Easter. And 3 days before, that Friday is what holiday? Anybody know?
Good Friday.
Good Friday. So this is during the Middle Ages. They're coming to the Jews. Oh my God, we have such seichel. We had to advise them. And pretty soon they said, it's got to stop. We got to figure it out our own. So this is how important the months are. They're so important to us. And anyway, that's why I've been spending the last day or two. I've been trying to figure all this out. And many times I'm in the shower, I'm trying to figure what's going on. I said, oh my God, when I got out of the shower, I got to hit my computer and look that up, because I don't want to spread misinformation. And I really think that that's what we're destined to do. We're destined to study. We're destined to teach. We're destined to learn all from one another. Yeah, you would be so shocked at the casual comments that have come right out of this group that have really just stumped me so much. But I'm a hard worker. I will keep at it until I understand it. And then what I have to do, I have to review it. Why? Because I forget. I'm going to forget the Hebrew. So I'm going to review it. And I have a little notebook. It's called machberet. I don't know. They still use that word, Rabbi Goldstein? Machberet?
Not usually. I mean, in a modern Hebrew class, but we don't use it in shul so much, or in religious school.
It means a little exercise book.
Yeah.
Notebook. And today I'm all electronic. Back in the day, it was like with those little blue narrow lines. Remember those? And you have to learn how to write the cursive. And, you know, it's like, I think all knowledge is so beautiful because then we understand. So anyway, it says 12:2, very important. The claim, it's the first commandment, but I have trouble narrowing it down because there's a lot of other ones that could
Yeah.
also.
I've never heard that before. Generally accepted is that be fruitful and multiply is the first commandment in Genesis 2.
Yes.
So I don't know, but it is, I would say, I do appreciate your point that it's the first commandment regarding time, which becomes very important in Judaism. So much of our halakha is very time-based. Obviously, holidays, everybody's holidays are time-based in some way. But also like the sun up and sundown, and you know, when we do this and when we have to do this and whatever. And you know, as I've mentioned, we're in the Pesach tractate in Daf Yomi right now, and so much of it has been about preparing for Passover, not necessarily. I mean, some of it's been about the rules of Passover itself, but mostly it's been about preparing, and like up until what hour can you still eat chametz on the day, like, you know, obviously Passover starts at sundown. So how early in that day before sundown can you still be eating chametz? Does it make a difference if it's in your home or out of your home? When do you have to like have your home completely free of chametz by, and which has also generated some interesting conversations in the shiur that I attend sometimes between among the women who now are responsible for all the Pesach cleaning, and the Rabbanit saying, dirt is not chametz. Your spring cleaning is not the same as bidikat chametz. It didn't take 3 days the way it does now back then. They just put their dishes outside or buried them. But so anyway, so like there's a lot of really important, like up until what hour, there's very specific time stuff that does become important in Judaism. And it's interesting too, as long as we're talking about this, like this initial setting of time that we get as old as Exodus, but in Mishnah and Talmud, so much of it is like, the hours I find hard to track. Like the 6th hour is 5 p.m. or something. Like it's about how I don't know, like quadrants of the sky that the sun is in, because they didn't have time as we know it until trains were built. That's when clocks were invented, because they needed to organize, like they needed to synchronize. If the train leaves here at this time, when will it arrive at its like, when is the next stop, so people know when to be ready at the station, which is mind-blowing to me. That's so recent.
Yes. May I add one piece? I forgot to tell you the most important thing, which is this. The reason why the movement of the moon is so important is if I divide the 28 days into 4 pieces, I get Shabbat. I get 7.
Right. It's very clean. We can
never forget that. I know if it's Sunday, 6 more days, Shabbat.
Right.
No one has to tell me. I can count that.
And you mentioned Ramadan. I learned recently that the Hindu calendar is similar to ours. It is lunar, but they have the reset month as well to make sure it stays coordinated with the vernal or with the solar seasons and all that, which was interesting.
There's also the metonic cycle, METONIC, which it's the same as ours. And it's very accurate.
All right. Debbie, you look like you're mulling through something.
If we're done with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had a couple of questions. I'm trying to decide which one to start with, which one's more, maybe the one that's most important is the one that in 13:9, for instance. Most of the traditions that are laid out here are specifically about Passover and how we're to celebrate it. But then that one is talking about shall serve a sign upon your hand and a reminder on your forehead. And we know that what they're talking about there in the beginning of the Shema, I guess.
Yes.
But it's not solely in the holiday of Passover. It gets taken out and put into every Shabbat and every prayer service, I guess, actually, whatever day of the week you're praying.
If you pray.
Yeah. So any special reason why that became universal for the year instead of just for now? I mean, it makes sense. I'm not arguing with it, but just curious how it.
Yeah. Well, so part of it is that, it's in the narrative of the Torah, right? The Exodus is the precursor to Mount Sinai, right? Like I was reviewing some materials in preparation for our Lamentations class on Sunday. So I was looking through my notes from my class on female body and biblical literature, because that's really prevalent in Lamentations. But I came across also like something in my notes about how much of the Torah is a wedding, like, or how much of the relationship between the Israelites and God is a marriage. So this time right now is the courtship. Again, that's part of all of the, as you mentioned, the 10 commandments leading up to the Israelites being won over. Like, this is the courtship period. And then next comes the wedding at Mount Sinai. So Passover, it's here because it's significant that this is like, all right, this is my proposal to you. You're going to come out of Egypt. We're going to have this ceremony, and it's going to be enduring. You're going to teach this to your children forever. But then, like, you don't just, I mean, you might celebrate your anniversary every year, but you're married every day. Like, that covenant, your ketubah, whatever, is still like a living document that lives between you two in between. So that's how I think of this, and
Okay.
that concept of teach this teaching to your children and all of that.
Okay. So it didn't get stuck in the Haggadah. It got put into the prayer book, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was your second question, Deb?
Oh, well, I guess this goes back to the history of it all, where this was on, so that's why maybe it's sort of picky, but maybe not so much. It's 1246. The law of Passover offering, no foreigner may eat of it, and okay, we can deal with that another time, but then it says, it shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house. And I thought there was a period, like the period of the temple, where it was customary for families to make pilgrimage to the temple. And my image is everybody sitting on the equivalent of a picnic blanket around the temple. Yeah, so they're not in their house, they're outside. And I just was curious if there's anything written any place about how that became a custom rather than staying home and eating in your own home, like it says.
It's a good question, because it was absolutely a part of a sacrifice. I mean, the sacrifice was made in the temple.
And that one could say is God's house, so that's inside, but maybe that's all it is. But I mean, it's pretty clear here, at least in my translation, it is.
Okay, well, so Rashi says Beit here we shouldn't understand physically as a house, but like how we say Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, like a unit,
Okay.
a family. Although I find that still troubling, because somewhere else doesn't it say in this parsha that if a family, I mean, I guess
Yes.
in a different time, but if a family's too poor, two families can split the lamb.
Right, it did say
So
that, yeah.
even within a unit, oh wait, here we go. In the courtyard, no. I don't know, maybe you could expand it out to like anyone within the Eruv is still one bite.
Oh, I was reading about the Eruvs, that this is totally off the subject, but since you bring it up, the book we're reading for book club.
Yeah.
And yeah, and if you've started it, this is an amazing book, David. What's the name of it?
A paragon.
It's the name of a paragon, but he ties things together in many places. And he's talking about the high wire above Gehenna. And then he starts talking about the Eruvs, and I didn't realize there's an Eruv all around the borough of Manhattan. It goes
Yes.
from the East River to the Hudson, and it goes from Harlem to someplace down there in the South. I did not know that. That's amazing.
Yes. Then there in the Bronx, there are specific ones, like Riverdale has one, but you can't go outside of Riverdale. That might be the only
I'm sure
Jewish
Brooklyn,
community left in the Bronx anyway, but
and I'm sure Brooklyn has several, because it would, you couldn't share an Eruv with the wrong
No.
group of
no, the
of
Satmar
Jews,
and the
no.
Syrians for sure don't share an Eruv, even though they live next to each other. Yeah. I guess they
Okay,
don't
I'm
really
sorry.
live
Let's
right
take
next to
that.
each other. The East, no, what do you call them? The West Indians live in between Crown Heights and Syrian Jewish Flatbush. Let's see. The history of Passover, 2 Kings 23:2. There was not kept such a Passover from the days of the judges that judged in Israel, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel, nor of the kings of Judah. That's interesting. Well, for some of that, there was no temple. I don't know that I accept that there was no Passover. Who is king in 2 Kings 23:22? What part of how far away from Solomon building the temple are we?
I don't remember.
You just had that citation ready to go, but not. All right, let's look it up. Kings. Oh, wait, 2 Kings. Let me put that in. 23. Oh, that is pretty far in. Give me a king.
She's playing poker.
Yeah. We're in the prophet Huldah. Yeah, Josiah. Okay, that makes sense. All right, I'll accept that. Josiah.
So
What?
what is that you're accepting? I missed that.
That Joel pointed out that in 2 Kings chapter 23, there is a claim that there was no Passover celebration between the Exodus and King Josiah. And at first I was like, I don't know about that. That feels like a long time to ignore a Torah commandment. But it makes sense because, first of all, they didn't have a temple for a lot of that time, or an altar to have a pilgrimage and set festival around. And then pretty shortly after the building of the first temple, the kingdom split, and again, they didn't have like a unified ritual practice, and there was lots of corruption and idolatry between the various kings of Israel and Judah from Solomon's children onward. And then King Josiah established Deuteronomic law again. There's a passage that says, well, in Kings I just saw it says the priest found it. In Jeremiah, I'm pretty sure it says King Josiah found it, but a scroll of the teaching of the Lord's law. And my my teacher for a class on Jeremiah said by found, they probably mean wrote, but it would have been an oral, passed down from the time of Moses. It was almost definitely Deuteronomy. But having the physical scroll helped implement it. And so that makes sense then that would be the time that they finally get around to establishing the set pilgrimage festivals and sacrifices and rituals. Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of shows they're pretty much exactly like us.
Yes.
Like we have pretty good idea what we want to do, but we fudge the rules a little bit.
Yep. So that's this week's Torah portion. Thanks for joining us, folks.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you,
Thank
Joel.
you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
everybody.